We have two professors and one PhD student involved in research at UCLA here to talk to us about the recent NIH funding cuts, which became effective as of late July, and also to talk about how suspending numerous NIH grants and federal funds to their research has affected their labs as well as their lives since.
My lab studies how metabolism influences a cell's fate and function in our bodies. And we study this in different contexts. We study this in development, and we also study it in our tissue stem cells in adults, but we also study it in different disease contexts, such as cancer. Most of the research funding that I lost is on our cancer research. My lab's cancer research is leading to clinical trials that patients and families are relying on.
So my academic career started at UCLA as an undergrad, so I've been here for a long time, but my work sits at the intersection of engineering, physics, and neuroscience, and we aim to identify current hurdles or bottlenecks in the way of asking and answering modern neuroscience questions, and then we develop the tools. They might be engineering microscopes, writing software, developing algorithms to enable us and collaborating researchers to be able to ask and hopefully answer new questions in the fields of neuroscience.
I'm pursuing my PhD in Dr. Pavik Shah's lab here in Terasaki Life Sciences, which is the building that I actually work at, the building where our lab is. Very broadly, my research is focused on studying development. And so what I'm particularly interested in is trying to understand like the basic processes that lead from an embryo, the very earliest, development of an organism all the way up to its adulthood. And in order to actually study that, we utilize nematodes.
One of our recent cancer discoveries discovered a way to treat a hereditary form of kidney cancer. This hereditary form of kidney cancer is called HLRCC, hereditary leiomyomatosis with renal cell cancer. My lab discovered that these types of kidney cancers are very susceptible to treatment with a known drug in the clinic called 6-mercaptopurine. And our discovery actually has led to the beginning of a phase 1 clinical trial here at UCLA.
So we build, for the most part, these miniature fluorescent microscopes. They are, we call them miniscopes. And this research, both for us, our collaborators, and across the world using these microscopes, span basic neuroscience questions, just understanding how memory might work, how neural function might work. And then those extend all the way into neurological disorders and diseases, investigating epilepsy and treatments for epilepsy, Alzheimer's, and a huge range of right now, a lot of memory deficits that just occur through aging.
So in other words, we study worms, and we use a model organism called C. elegans. And so it's a microscopic worm that is transparent. So it actually acts as a very useful model for development because we can actually watch all of the developmental processes happen in real time using advanced microscopy. And the general idea of why we're doing this research is to hopefully take these studies that we do in worms to understand these fundamental processes and potentially apply them to other systems such as mice, and eventually those studies can inform the work that happens in human and developmental studies in humans, such as like stem cell studies or just general developmental studies that involve like congenital disorders.
The total amount of funding to my lab that is currently suspended is around $800,000 direct, which is a significant portion of my lab's annual budget. I'm essentially scrambling to find funding for my lab to keep my lab afloat, to keep the trainees in my lab able to continue their projects, which are important for their training. I can keep it going for a few months, but I'm not going to be able to keep it going for a year without the NIH funding suspension being lifted.
So it's quite a substantial change. Roughly over $1 million of funding have been suspended that we would have had access to over this coming year. So what this has meant is right away we basically paused all non-essential spending. So right now we're prioritizing holding the other types of funding we have that are non-suspended. Those are internal funding from UCLA as well as some private foundation grants, and basically holding all those funds to cover salaries of the trainees in my group, because I think that's the most important. So right now we're trying to continue doing research, but really prioritizing protecting our remaining funds to protect the salaries of everyone in the lab.
So unfortunately, our primary grant, which is an NIH fulfilled grant, was actually frozen. So that's the primary grant that we draw funds from. Additionally, we have some training grants, 3 out of 4. So I was recently on a training grant, which was funded through the NIH, which fortunately, the period that I was on that grant for just ended. So I wasn't personally impacted by the funding freeze for my grant, but 2 of the other graduate students who also were on that grant and were about to enter either their first or second year under that grant just had their funds frozen. So essentially that means that because the fact that the funding is up in the air, the extra funds that were going to primarily go towards them, fulfilling their research and having a little bit more flexibility with where the money comes from for their research is actually kind of off the table for now. And so we're fortunate in that, we have some secondary funds that we can draw from for the meantime that allow us to, keep things going.
I've taken great care in building my team. Every single person in my lab is outstanding. Every project in my lab has momentum and the potential for an important discovery.
So internally, just in my lab, about half of the trainees in my lab, both grad students and postdocs, are international trainees that are on visas. And so they are extremely concerned just in the general ecosystem right now around student visas, academic visas, and maintaining a position at UCLA to be able to stay in America.
The other major concern I have is that this is not good for the future of biomedical science because trainees are viewing this career path as extremely unstable. I'm worried about a brain drain with our younger scientists, just because this level of stress is not really sustainable.
To work with a path that graduate students and postdocs saw themselves taking, which was staying in academia, pursuing scientific questions that they really care about. For many of them, that has more or less been removed from an option from them, at least currently. And so they're exploring what other opportunities there would be to stay in the States long term, because while there's hope that federal funding will get stabilized and back on track at some point in the future, that timeline is likely outside the scope for grad students and postdocs to feel comfortable that there is a reasonable career for them moving forward.
I mean, unfortunately, and this is just the truth, I will leave UCLA before I have to fire people in my lab. I can go and do my research somewhere else. This is not what I want to do. I love being at UCLA. I trained here I went here as an undergrad, and I was really honored to come back to UCLA and join the faculty here and set up my research program here.
We're all working towards the same goals, and so I think the way it's being approached in this administration is just different. So it makes it hard to plan, and that changes on a weekly basis. So it's I think unprecedented across like all the different metrics you could imagine for how you run a lab and how universities expect and manage grants, and then all the way I think into the NIH and NSF.
I would actually imagine that most people would want me to continue my research. My research has led to FDA-approved drugs and multiple clinical trials that are holding a lot of promise for helping a lot of people. I'm surprised that biomedical research in particular is being, funding for it is being suspended and being kind of used as a tool for politics. It's also important for our economy. A lot of the biotech industry and pharmaceutical industry, and even, investment firms rely on discoveries out of academic research institutions to fuel their business. And so I think that this is just, it's not good for anyone.
We do. We develop a lot of microscopes, which it costs money for parts and engineering costs and fabrication costs. And so we are definitely have to slow down and reprioritize projects based on limited funding there. But we also aim for almost all the tools we develop to be openly disseminated, and we support the global research community to use microscopes. And so, like, for every single person I know in academia, we are here because we love the type of work we do, and we see that there is either short-term or long-term value to our country, to human health, to understanding of the universe.
And so, but the reality there is, even with that in mind, we still have had to shift priorities and think about, a lot of the model. So a lot of the tools that we use for our research in particular, like the tools that I use, are transgenically modified worms. So worms that have been modified to contain certain genes that we're interested in studying, for example. And, in order to generate new transgenic worms, in many cases, we have to either do it ourselves using expensive reagents, or we can outsource the generation of those models to companies. And so in many cases, like, some of the more useful companies for that are abroad. And so not only are we having to worry about the fact that we have less funds to work with to actually order these, we also have to worry about the fact that the tariffs that went into effect are actually also impacting the general cost for ordering those in the first place.
And we choose to be here because we care about our work and we believe it's important. And we've built out a system where we can shape our work to align with what the goals are of the federal government, and be able to answer the calls when the NIH says that we really care about a certain disease. We get to write proposals and use our expertise to address what should be concerns across all of America and the federal government. And that is broken down a bit. And so I think the narrative around higher education and academics being extremely liberal or misusing funds, of course, I think funds could always be optimized and there could be better uses in general of funds. But we really are here because we just care about answering these interesting questions and understand what the long-term impacts can be to the world. And it's hard to see those things starting to be questioned and being limited of what we even can think about doing in terms of our labs, because we at least know a lot of the general questions we've been pursuing across science and universities. Those priorities are changing across the federal government, and it's a struggle to know we're like not here for ourselves, and it to be still really difficult to pursue and fight this narrative that universities and faculty and research labs are in it for these other reasons.